Hello and welcome. I'm Daryl Ehrlich, and this is Stories of Honor 2019, a project of the Billings Gazette. And today I am lucky to have in studio Donn Bruggeman. He was in Korea, and I'm excited because we've had several Korean war vets, and I've been reminded that it's been called the Forgotten War, and hopefully this helps remember it a little better. So Donn served in the U.S. Army from 1951 to 1953, and we're going to hear his story. I'm going to just ask the questions now, and we'll welcome Donn. Donn, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
You bet, it's an honor. So tell me, Donn, tell me a little bit about your background. Let's start before you were in the Army. Where's home? Where were you born and raised?
I was born, went through the 7th grade in Baker, Montana, a small town, and moved with my folks to Wolf Point in 1941, and that's where I went through high school, and I eventually went to college at the University of Montana.
Okay.
And at that time I was drafted. They gave me an exemption to finish college, which I thought was pretty nice. And it really turned out to be quite a deal for me, because when I was drafted, they deferred. I missed the first bad year in Korea when all the Americans were overrun by the Chinese, and so I missed that winter.
Right.
But I spent the next 2 winters there.
Yeah.
That's kind of the history of small town Donn getting.
So what did small town Donn study at the University of Montana?
Well, I took business management.
Okay.
And I graduated in June of 1951.
Okay.
And immediately went to basic training. I mean, that was when my exemption was over.
Right, and so they took you as soon as they could get you.
Yeah, and at that time, people weren't really up on the war. I mean, even though it was going on, it was, like you said, it's kind of forgotten. People weren't excited about it. It was 5 or 6 years since the World War II had ended, and so it was no big deal. And I happened to be the only guy in my class that was drafted.
Did you feel picked on? When you were going coming up in high school? Did you worry about being drafted?
The draft was still on from World War II, but we never thought about it.
Uh-huh.
And I never did think about it until I got my classification, which was 1A. Yeah, but I was in college then, and they deferred me. And in those days, they deferred married fellows, and they deferred farmers mostly. Okay. So it depended on the local draft board. And as I said, I was the only guy out of our county that was drafted at that year, and my dad wasn't too happy about that. And he went to the head of the school board, the draft board in Wolf Point, and wanted to find out what was going on. And that fella, as head of the draft board, didn't agree with drafting either, and he resigned from the draft board. He was the head of. He was a farmer from Wolf Point there, and so there was a few bad feelings at that time, but mostly people just didn't know what was going on, really.
Yeah. How did you feel when you found out you were drafted?
It didn't bother me at all. I was glad to go. I was glad to serve my country, and I didn't have a job lined up, and so I was ready to go.
Okay. So you finish up in Missoula. You're from Baker and Wolf Point.
Yeah.
And where did you do basic?
I was sent to Fort Lee, Virginia.
It's a long way away from Montana, boy.
Well, it was clear across the country on the train, and that was in July '51, and basic is basic, no matter what you're in, and that was, I think I came home. We all knew we were going to Korea. I mean, everybody knew where they were going to end up, but basic training finished in December of 1951, and they sent me home on leave for a few days before it was to report to Seattle to ship overseas. Well, everybody knew where they were going, but I had no hard feelings about this because, for one thing, my girlfriend at that time, who is now my wife of 65 years.
Congratulations.
She said she'd wait for me.
Okay.
And that made me happy. So I was off to the war a happy guy because I figured I was lucky to be where I was and going to. I knew Korea, but didn't know where I was going to end up over there. But at least I felt good about it anyway. So
yeah. You said that most people, and I think that's right. Most people weren't aware of what was going on in Korea. Were you aware at the time before?
Not really.
Okay.
We had a little bit of it because there was a couple of guys that came back that first winter of '50 that had been there, that had been overrun by the Chinese, and they came. I remember they came to the fraternity house. Man, they were kind of woke us up a little bit as to what really went on over there because. I felt sorry for those guys, and it kind of frightened me, thinking that I was going to go over there. But you make the best out of it. I think I had a good attitude to start with, and that helped me.
Yeah.
I think through everything, and I was lucky. Besides, or blessed. I think I was probably blessed.
Yeah.
I had quite a few people praying for me, and that helped.
Yeah, that does help, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yep, that sure does. So you go to Seattle after basic, and you know where you're going. What then?
Well, when you get off the train at Seattle, there they put you in a World War I barracks, and it was cold. I thought colder than Montana, Seattle. It's December,
right?
And so
wet.
So you're in the Army. You're always waiting for something. You're always waiting. So they finally put us in a naval barracks down by the pier. And that was wonderful. And we knew we were going to Korea. We didn't know how, but we knew that sooner or later they'd call us. So we had a couple of days on the pier there, and I think I had Christmas. I can't remember, a Christmas dinner there at the pier, and we finally boarded a little troop ship. I say small troop ship, maybe 300 to 400. Troops on that ship. I left Seattle heading. We didn't know we were going to Japan first, but it turned out that we hit a terrible storm right out of Seattle, and day after day after day, a storm. It wouldn't let you up on deck, and then, as I said, it was a small ship, and they told us afterwards, the crew even got sick. It was so bad, seasick, and we went up to Alaska. And a place called Adak in the Aleutians. That's where they stopped for a day, and then back on our way to Japan. And so it took us 21 days on that ship, which wasn't too good. You didn't ever really feel that good on a ship in the rough weather. But so we landed in Japan and Tokyo, Japan, and that was the start of it.
Yep.
They put us on a train, and I'll just keep going as long as
please do.
Off the ship onto a train in Tokyo, going south down I think the island is Honshu. I'm not sure, the main island of Japan, down to the southern tip of Japan that was naval base called Sasebo, and they had a replacement depot there. They call it a repo depot. And everybody knew that was not the place to be because everybody went there just waiting for orders to go to Korea. So the train ride was interesting going through Japan. It was January. It was cold, January '52. And we passed through Nagasaki, which had been bombed by the atom bomb, and that was at that time, which maybe 6 years later.
Yep.
And it was still nothing but flat rubble. The whole big city was just nothing there, and the train went right through it. I thought it was kind of an eerie feeling to see that how many years later and still nothing there. And so that train ride was only, I think, a day. We got down to Sasebo, and it was cold. It was really cold, and the conditions in a repo depot are minimal. I think I had one blanket, and the food was, at least you got a hot meal, I think, once a day. And every morning you'd get up and you'd go to the assembly area hoping to hear your name called for an assignment in Korea. So I think I was there a couple of days, and the name of Bruggeman wasn't all that easy to pronounce, and those guys would call out the names every morning, and you're straining to hear. Right. And that's a little nerve-wracking too. And so after I think a couple of days, my name was called for the combat engineer, 19th Engineer Combat Group, and I thought, boy, Don, you lucked out again. You didn't get infantry. Even though they're combat engineers, it's still a better deal. And so I was blessed again, and everything is still feeling good for me. I thought, well, it's cold, but I'm from Montana, so
right.
So here we go. So once your name is called, well, you report to it's kind of like a ferry just across that from Sasebo base, just across to Pusan. It's kind of a ferry ride, and the problem was when you get ready to get on that ferry, they issued us brand new rifles, and that was scary because those rifles were full of grease, cosmoline. They were brand new, and it's about zero weather, and the only way you could get rid of that grease was the instructions were to boil it, all the parts and everything, in water. Well, we didn't even have any paper. There was no way for us to clean those rifles, and I thought, gee, the Army must know better than this, to send us up in a combat zone with a rifle that was useless. So that worried us all the way over to Pusan, and then they put us on a train, and we headed north. We went through the capital, Seoul, and it was nothing but rubble. It had been destroyed almost completely, and I just thought, guys, it's been captured 2 or 3 times, back and forth, the Chinese, and it was still just nothing but rubble. And reverting a little bit, the Summer Olympics I watched in Seoul, I couldn't believe it. I cannot believe that city, they rebuilt that thing beautiful. Anyway, the train kept going farther north, and the ferry had been all night, and then all day on the train. It was getting a little later in the day, and the train made a stop, and they said, this is the end of the line for the train. And a few people got off along the way for their assignments, and there was still about a truckload of us that were going to go. They put us in a truck to go farther north. Well, it's kind of an uneasy feeling because you don't know just where you're going to end up. Anyway, we got in the trucks, and they kept going and going, and we got up in the mountains, a very mountainous region. And as I said, it's wintertime. It's below zero all the time. And we came to this 19th Engineer Combat Group that they were in a valley, and we stopped there, and this is where I got off. And they said, there's a few other companies down the road. The guys were getting off. They said, so the warrant officer, he said, we need I had a degree in business. He said, a company commander and the first sergeant here at the headquarters need a clerk, administrative assistant. And so I thought, boy, I'm lucky again. I get headquarters company. And so that was another break for me. So they sent me down to they were tents. I mean, we were camped out and be ready to move at any time. They sent us down to the headquarters tent, and the fellow that I was replacing was so happy to see a replacement come, so he could rotate. That he was so happy, And I said, gee, the first thing you got to do, I said, I got to fix this gun. He says, oh, don't worry. He said, we'll go to the supply sergeant and get you a clean rifle, which he did. He took me right, because he could tell I was bothering me in a combat zone with a useless rifle. Anyway, that was the first thing he did for me, and I think he was a corporal. And so that's when I started out in headquarters company, learning the job with him for, well, maybe a week, so not long. And there was, being headquarters company was a big deal because they had a lot of stuff for the group. We had a group, and the group consisted of different companies. I can name a few. They had a truck company, they had a treadway bridge company, and we had a searchlight company, and so they all reported in to us, and all the orders and for personnel and all the things that went on came through headquarters, which was through me eventually. And so I learned that job, and it was cold. They put me in. The tents were pretty ratty. They had, at that time, they had a couple of wool blankets, and the Army was still behind after this many years in cold weather gear. And so I was in a tent with 8 cooks, and they were all from the South, and they were suffering miserably in the cold weather because trying to cook and do their job. Well, for anybody, when it's below zero and you're outdoors, you can't do much. And
yeah, it's
and so there was another replacement in there that got in there before I did. And he became a friend, and nobody else was really friendly. I mean, everybody's kind of had their own deal going. They're one they can rotate. Being in a combat zone like we were, they called it a zone. We were, it turned out, I found out later, headquarters company was probably one ridge, maybe a mile from the fighting, the actual fighting. We could hear it all the time. And we all had foxholes to get in because the artillery would come in once in a while, but it did. And so the Chinese would send patrols out. We were still fighting the Chinese then. The North Koreans had been defeated. So guard duty at night was, even with a new rifle, was scary.
Why?
Because you can't see very much, and you got to be really alert. It's 2 hours on and 4 off at 20 below zero. And I just hate to remember that. It was tough. Anyway, we got through the winter, and I made a few friends, and things got better. The equipment from the Army wasn't bad. We finally got some down sleeping bags, which were a big help.
Right, and 20 below, I imagine so.
Well, some of the tents had little stoves in them, but it was pretty primitive, because we had to be.
How big was the tent that you slept in?
It was what they call a squad tent.
Okay.
It was big enough for 10 men.
Okay.
And you were spaced all upside, down one side and back, and the little stoves didn't do much below zero, but we got along. I thought the Army was a little behind on getting us winter gear. I think I had a wool sweater and a field jacket, and as I said, I was lucky to be from Montana. Those guys from the South suffered, and where we were in North Korea, we were above the 38th parallel, and the 38th parallel, they tell me, is about what runs through Montana. I don't know, but anyway, Peninsula was. We weren't too far from the ocean, but it was still cold and humid, and so that was a tough winter. And a lot of guys rotated. They had you get so many points a month to rotate home, and I think you could rotate after Oh, let's see. I rotated after 15 months. I had, and that was combat points that you got for that. So that was a tough winter, and things got better, and I learned my job pretty good. I did good. Promoted. I was a private when I got there, and I was promoted. I think the next summer I was promoted to corporal and then sergeant. And as I said, I was sustained by my family and my girlfriend, and I had a lot of the mail service was good. It would come every day when you got maybe 7, 8 letters at once, and then you wouldn't get any for a while. But being with the cooks, they took care of me. I got good food.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what did Korea look like? What does it look like? Because I think a lot of people think of it as a tropic, but it's mountainous, it's cold. What does it look like? What did you recall?
Well, on the train, we went, as I said, we went from Busan all the way to Seoul, and that took quite a bit, and that was all pretty flat country. Really, we went past Incheon, which later was in the big deal in the war, and it was pretty flat country, except when we got up around the 38th parallel, we peeled off to the right a little bit towards, and it was all mountainous. Now the mountains were not like, I'm not talking about Glacier Park or anything. The mountains were not real high mountains, but they were ridge mountains, and you couldn't. It was tough going. The fighting was tough because they'd fight. We were in a big valley, river valley, and so they were always ready to move because the Chinese could have started a big movement and come down that valley. We had to get out of there, but the mountains were not big, and the trees were not real big either, and the forest wasn't thick where we were. At least that's where we were. We didn't get into the trees much. I had one interesting time when they called in because I knew what the other companies were doing. They called in the searchlights. I'm talking about those big movie searchlights that you shine up in the air. They're on the back of a truck. We had a bunch of them, and they'd say they're Chinese. They're thinking they're going to mass their troops and come up over this ridge, and that you can go and take a ride up there and watch. And they turned those searchlights on. It's just like daylight. There's no sneaking around up there. The timber wasn't that thick. You could see the Chinese thinking they're going to come over. Well, of course, with those searchlights on them, they couldn't do it. The artillery just opened up. Our artillery would open up on them. So that was interesting to me to see that they know we knew what we were doing. And the as I said at that point, we were the only fighting was north of the 38th parallel, up there in the Punch Bowl, they called it, and Sniper Ridge, and I think there's been movies about that. But as I said, we could hear the fighting, but we felt pretty secure where we were. So that was, and then the second winter is coming up, and things got better. They got moon boots, they call, for your feet, and they got big parkas that we could have, and we thought, well, the Army's doing the best they can, because it wasn't big maybe at home, but over there it was a big war. I mean, there was thousands of guys, and I remember we had a kind of a natural hill near our company, and whenever somebody from the entertainment industry would come, they would come there because they could put a stage up, and they liked it. The entertainers liked it because they could hear the firing and they knew they were close to the war zone, and they could they liked that. Well, one time I remember the first time Debbie Reynolds came, and she was a big star then, and so we got to see a few of the folks. Marilyn Monroe came, and Betty Hutton, and but they didn't stay long. I mean, they put their show on, and they were back. And there was a pretty good main line road there, because we were we were attached to the whatever infantry division was on the line. That was who we were supporting, and so when the divisions changed, like they'd go from the 1st Cav to the 25th Division, there's a lot of traffic. It maybe took them 2 or 3 days to change because the tanks and everything go up and down that road. So we knew something was going on, and we really couldn't tell. The war effort just seemed like it slowed down that second, after the second winter there. Things, the fighting was going on up in the Punch Bowl, and that was just kind of back and forth on mountain ridges at that time. And I felt sorry for those guys, but we got through the second winter, and I remember after you'd been there a year, they would fly you to Tokyo for R&R. They call it rest relaxation, and for 3 days. And so I had 2 friends, and we decided to go. And the nearest town wasn't much of a town; it was 50 miles away, and they had an airstrip there. And so you go down there, and they get on this plane. I said, I don't know about this. That plane, I don't think it's going to make it. So it was an old rat trap, and I don't know. You had to fly over the Sea of Japan or something into Tokyo, and rest and recuperation. And there's 3 of us, and we were downtown. I can remember, just like yesterday, the downtown Tokyo, 8 million people, and we're in a taxi cab, and they're driving all over. And I said, hey, stop the taxi. I know that guy.
Really?
I went to school with him in Baker, Montana, in grade school. Huh. And so, sure enough, Larry Bush from Baker, and he said, hey, you guys, he said, I'm the harbor master here. He was a non-com, but he was in charge of everything that came in the Yokohama, Tokyo harbor. And what a break for us. He took us for a yacht ride in the harbor. And I was surprised at the nice-looking big homes along that in a part of that harbor. And he took us all over Tokyo. The nightlife. He took us to a nightclub, and then he took us to where the premier lives, the palace. Yeah, we went through the palace, and they had a wonderful PX. So we had a good time, and he showed us everything. We were really lucky on that 3 days. And
what are the chances? That's
amazing.
That's it.
Just blessed all the time. And so that was getting towards the end. And in the meantime, I'd gotten promoted again to sergeant 1st class, and I had a Captain Schmidt, I remember, a wonderful man, was our company commander. And I had a lot of communication to do on the telephone. They had secret, funny names, for certain outfits. And I was talking to the motor pool guys, all kinds of guys. And he said, Captain Schmidt said one day, he said, Don, you're picking up an awful lot of bad language talking to those guys. You should watch it. And it dawned on me. You get to talking, you hear that all the day, and you forget what you're supposed to be doing. Really, you watch yourself, and he was a wonderful captain. And not long after that, they had a general come in. I forget what they call him, Inspector General, and his crew came into our company and reviewed everything. And they said later, and it was nervous time, they said, you guys got the best rating in all of Korea of a rating from the general. And so we were really happy about that. And that was when I was promoted to sergeant 1st class. And not long after that, they promoted me to 1st sergeant of the whole company. So I was hoping to go home pretty soon. I had enough points, and Captain Schmidt wrote me up for the Bronze Star, and I thought that was pretty nice of him. He thought I did a good enough job and that's the Bronze Star for that administrative stuff was not for valor, of course. That was for exemplary service of the other kind, non-combative time. So I thought that was pretty nice of him, and that was in March, and in May I found out I had enough points to rotate, and I rotated home.
Mm-hmm.
So
what did you think of the were the Chinese tough fighters? What did you think of them as soldiers?
There was a lot of talk about them using a lot of drugs and things, and they weren't, from what I heard, they weren't, they were not that tough. I mean, they were not vicious, I think. They were tough fighters. But, gee, I know one time we went up there and I said, oh, Jesus, who are those guys? They were standing over there, and oh, those are the guys are from Turkey. You know, it's United Nations forces. Mm-hmm. I said, those guys would scare you. They had big sabers hanging from their mm-hmm. uniforms, and they were scary looking. Those guys, mm-hmm. and I tell you the truth, I never did see any Chinese. I heard a lot of them, but I never did see any of them. Right. The North Koreans, they had been defeated, so I don't know what they were. We had South Koreans that helped us. They helped us in mm-hmm. did laundry and did stuff that and they got paid, of course. Yep. So
what were the South Korean people like?
Oh, they were very friendly. Boy, they were just wonderful people. I just thought, gosh, they were just so nice, and I know we had a guy. They said they don't show their age, and they said he's going to do our laundry sometimes. I said, well, how old is he? Oh, he's in his 40s. I said, gosh, he doesn't look like he's 20 years old. But he had a family, and they allowed them to live outside of the company area, but they were very friendly people, and we were lucky to deal with them.
Yeah. So Korean winters are cold even for a guy from Baker?
Oh, brother. I said, even for me, being Baker and Wolf Point was probably even worse. I mean, up in the Highland, and the humidity with it, it was bad. They had shown us in Seattle before we shipped out. They had shown us movies mm-hmm. of how bad it was when the Americans were overrun up there with frostbite and guys losing their toes and fingers and everything because they didn't have anything warm enough. And it was bad, and it kind of scared everybody. You know, change your socks every day and get them dry socks, but. It was very cold, but we seemed to adapt to it. I mean, the cooks they were of course in a cook's tent where they had some heat around them all the time. So except when they came back to the tent,
well, that was probably even worse because you go from a warm environment, at least cold to colder, not warm to cold. Yeah.
Yeah, but they were wonderful. All the GIs, I thought. Of course, Headwaters Company, they probably going to pick the right kind of guys. Yeah. If they wanted, because we had, I never saw any derelicts, anybody, mm-hmm. anything, and we had a couple of clowns, of course, and we had one fella. he was a cook, and he was one of them jokers, and they said, oh, there's a bunch of brass coming today, so he said, oh, so he picked up a board and limped across the company compound. They said, how long are you keeping these guys up here? So, there was some humor involved, and as I said, I was very blessed to where I was and who I was with. And,
did you ever worry that you wouldn't come back home? That you wouldn't make it back to Montana?
I never thought that, no.
Okay.
I never did think that.
Mm-hmm. What'd you miss most about home? Do you remember missing anything in particular?
I missed my family, I think, the most, and my girlfriend. Mm-hmm. she was a pretty popular gal. 2 years. There was a lot of guys that got Dear John letters, and
Yeah.
she wrote me every day
Really?
for 15 months. Yep.
Wow.
And she said, well, it was hard writing something. And I said, well, but she took nursing in Bozeman, and she got a job in Billings before I got home. And so she's a Bobcat, and I'm a Grizzly, and we've been married 65 years.
Well, so it's a truly blended family. That must be true love, if you can look beyond that, right?
I was a lucky guy. I still am.
Yeah. What did you write? How often did you write? I mean,
I wrote once a week probably, and I would write my mother. I knew my mother was praying for me, and of course I missed 2 Christmases, I think. And
what's Christmas like in Korea when you're over there? What was that like?
pretty average. They had a special meal, but that was it. Just another day.
Huh.
Just another day. We did have we had a chaplain. The headquarters company had the group chaplain, and you could go to church once in a while. And in fact, that was the first Quonset hut that they built, and they felt that we were stationary enough that last summer that they built a Quonset hut for the chapel, and then they built one for the cooks. I mean, a mess hall.
Mess hall?
Yeah, there was still fighting going on, but it was, I think after I left, I don't know how many months, then the truce was, they were negotiating and they signed a truce. So.
Yeah. Did you, when you were over there, what was an average day like? Take me through, what did you do on an average day?
On an average day?
Yeah.
Well, you got up pretty early. The cooks would be up at 4 o'clock, but they were quiet. We got up about 6, and some days they had a company assembly. Not always.
Okay.
Maybe a couple days a week to see if everybody was there, and then you went to your meal, and then you went to your job, and it was just like a work job. It was a different location, a different tent, really, what it was. So you worked in your tent all day, and we were busy. We were busy all day, and most of the time. And if you're on guard about every 2 weeks or every 10 days. That was always a interruption that you hated to see coming up, but you knew you were due for it. So
yeah.
So and you had maybe. You could kind of knock off from the work maybe like you do 4 o'clock or 5 and get ready for supper. So it was pretty tame, really. I mean, gee whiz, you knew they were a mile up the road. They were fighting, back and forth, sniping, and so we consider ourselves pretty fortunate to just have a mundane day, at the office, kind of like. We had to be ready at any time, though. That was the thing. So.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of activity going on. People coming and going, orders, things. We were busy. So that was just every day was like that. So.
Yeah. So, what was the summer like in Korea?
It was just hotter. It was terrible. One time they said there's a reservoir up the road there that we can go to if you want. They took a truckload of us up there to go swimming. Well, the beach was maybe as wide as this office. The rest of it was mined. You don't get out of these lines to go in the water.
Right.
You can't really relax. I mean, it was fun because it was so doggone hot. And it just like the winters, it was probably, of course you're living outdoors, and so it was hot, humid hot.
Yeah.
So the summers were not near as bad as the winters, though. I'll tell you, everybody.
Was it hard to keep your spirits up day after day after day, or how did you manage to do that?
No, it wasn't. Everybody there was activity to go back to Corps headquarters, which was maybe 100 miles down the road. I don't know just where they were, the Corps headquarters, but they would send movies up, and so once in a while the courier would come up because we had mail daily. The couriers would come up and bring the movies, and then we could have a small space you could see the. Of course, they'd have to change the reels. I mean, it was, but it was a movie. I mean, so that was okay, and the spirits, the morale was high. I thought it was high. In our company, we had a good outfit, and everybody was top notch, and there was no screw ups. We had a medical department, doctors, and they had an S4 intelligence group. I mean, we had some. It was a big company.
Right. Did you, when you wrote home, what did you tell the folks back home about Korea?
I laid it out pretty. I know it bothered my mother, but I said, I'm going to let them know what it's like. And I would send pieces of we got the Stars and Stripes periodically, and I'd send some of that home, and I had one in here that Eisenhower had been elected, and he was gonna. He immediately came to Korea, which was fact finding for him. I thought that was pretty nice, and so everybody's morale was pretty high. They kept there was, as I said, if you're there a year, you can go to Tokyo and have some fun for 3 days. Not much, but stay out of trouble.
Right. So do you remember leaving Korea? What was that like?
No, that was wonderful. They had a packet about every month or so. I call it a packet, in trucks, and they put us on trucks, and I mean, you just felt so good. Nothing could do wrong. They took us to Incheon, which was a harbor closer by, and we had to wait there a day or two and sew our stripes on and have some good food, and then they put us on a ship and back to Seattle.
How long did it take to get back to Seattle?
Oh, not very long.
Did it seem like a long time? I mean, you were just waiting to get back stateside?
Yeah, it was just a good feeling all the time, and we weren't in any cold weather like we were in January going over, and I always remember landing in Seattle. Talk about small town Montana. They said, we're going to feed you guys, and get off the ship, and trucked us to an Army mess hall. It was close to the town, Seattle. And I walked in there, and I said, gee, there's a guy I went to high school with. He was he was from Wolf Point, and he was the mess hall officer. He ran the mess hall, and we couldn't believe it. He was a good friend in high school. So I went, and I was a sergeant, as I said, first class. That's 2 rockers, and put us all as sergeants in a certain barracks, and they took care of us pretty fast, physicals and whatnot, and we were on a train home within a couple of days with a lot of money.
Yeah, because there wasn't much to spend on in Korea, I imagine.
Zero.
What did you plan on spending your money on?
Well, I didn't have too many ideas. I knew there was some engagement and wedding rings to get.
Yeah.
I didn't have a car. I had $500 mustering out pay, which was a lot of money. I kept sending it all home. Everything was free where we were, toothpaste and cigarettes, and my dad had put it in savings, and so our wife and I weren't not married then. She was nursing here in Billings, and I was in Wolf Point. So my sister had come home from California, and she had a convertible. so she said, Don, I'd take that car. So about every weekend I'd come to Billings, and we'd spend money having a good time. And I'd wait till she got off work, and we'd go to the Northern. And honest to God, you could get a ribeye dinner at the cocktail hour, for $2.50. No kidding. At the Northern.
At the Northern.
Yeah.
That sounds like
that
sounds pretty good right now.
Those were the days.
Those were the days.
Yeah.
What did you, when you came home, what did you, was there any food or anything that you really, you thought all during your time in Korea that you would do as soon as you got home?
Yep. There was one thing.
Okay.
Even living with the cooks and everything, I wanted a cold glass of milk.
That is a story I have heard. Why? Because it's just powdered milk, right?
Yeah, powdered milk, powdered eggs, but that's what I wanted the worst. And
a cold glass of milk. Did you get it?
You bet. And I'll never forget that in Korea they said, well, you can't have anything that's grown in the ground because they use the human fertilizer or human feces for fertilizer. Right. So everything they grew, radishes, anything in the ground, we could not eat. So they'd ship in stuff, and being an engineering outfit, there was a MASH outfit down the road. You could trade them ply boards for some goodies to food from the MASH outfit. So yeah, engineering and everyone, the Army, people are always looking out for something better, and so. But that's what I wanted when I got home. Was a glass of milk, and that was, and I didn't do anything for several months. My mother, folks said, Don, don't you think about, I didn't want to do anything. I just go to Billings and have fun, and I said, don't you get a job? I said, well, I suppose I should. So I started. I didn't want to, 4 or 5 months, that's nothing.
Right. Because you've been working for 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah, no vacation. Every day was the same. Sunday, Saturday, everything was the same.
Right.
So I pushed it to the limit, and then I went to Billings and several times interviews, and I got a job into Exxon Refinery. So
yeah. So tell me, Don, when you look back on it, what was the thing that was the most important that you took from your time in Korea?
I think appreciation for the family and just the little things that you don't get. And I was always a pretty humble guy anyway, and I just thought, well, how blessed I was to go over there for 15 months and pretty long tour to be gone, and thankful for what I got. I think I was pretty blessed all the way.
Yeah.
So that still was ready to get home.
Yeah, no, when you were on guard duty, was that hard staying awake at night? Was it nerve-wracking?
Are you kidding? And you're figuring some guy's going to sneak over and stick a knife in you. No. It was tough.
Yeah.
And as it got better, we only had 4 guard positions for our company, and so we had a sergeant and as I said, 2 on and 4 off. Well, it went pretty slow for a while. I remember at one point, the communications center had a kind of a trailer, and they had a generator to keep the electricity so they could communicate.
Yeah.
And they'd run that generator at night, and and one guard station would go past that generator, and it blew hot air. And I can remember the movie High Noon came. You saw the movie, Gary Cooper, and there was a song in it. I can still remember, "Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling," that Western song.
Yeah.
And so one night I was walking by that generator, and I said, I just sang out. I says, "Do not forsake me, oh my darling." I didn't know that sound went all over the compound. Not over the whole thing, but close enough. And so when I got back to the other guard says, he said, did you hear anybody singing out there? He says, "I thought I heard somebody singing."
And he said,
I said, "No, I know, I didn't hear a thing." so there was some humor and some stuff, but
Yeah.
at that time it was the fighting was pretty well slowed down. So
Okay.
guard duty was a little bit different.
Right. Did you when you said you roomed with cooks and that they were there? Was there good food in Korea? If you were rooming with cooks, were they able to make anything that was good?
Well, yes, the food I thought was really good. We got mostly fresh eggs, and those cooks did a wonderful job and with what they had. And so once in a while we'd have to have K rations. Was it K or C ration? I guess it was C. They were just canned, and you had to eat that because they didn't have anything else. And then maybe the next week you'd get a T-bone steak. I said, yo, where do you have it? Oh, they traded with the MASH outfit or something and got some steaks. And our company was, well, the officers they all had all their own stuff, the officers, and they probably got different food, but we ate pretty darn good, I thought. Of course, the cooks took care of me, and I was a friend of them. They were good guys.
Yeah, yeah. When you got home, what do you remember about arriving back at home?
Well, I can tell you right off the bat, we got off the ship in Seattle. It was May. It wasn't raining for a change, and they put us on a bus to go to get our steak dinner, and there wasn't a band, there was nobody, nothing, and no protest. I mean, there wasn't anybody welcoming band or nothing. We were just happy to be home. We didn't care, and post-traumatic stress wasn't. I never did see any of that at that time.
Yeah,
there wasn't. But anyway, there was no welcoming home. I got home. A couple of my friends said, "Where you been?" So that war in Korea was low key,
right?
Even in Wolf Point,
Right. Do you think? Why do you? When you got back and people were like, "Where you been?" Why do you think? It dovetails well with what I was gonna ask you. Why do you think the Korean War is forgotten?
Well, I think people were still tired of war because of the World War II when they were still getting. I mean, it'd been 5 or 6 years. People were still getting over that, and here they wanted to put us into another. Actually, it was a world war because it was all the allies were over there, the United Nations, and but it was low key countrywide. It just didn't get the, and I feel bad about that even today because I look back at the statistics. You know that there's still 7,000 GIs missing. More than any place else in Korea, when the Chinese overran those guys in the winter that I wasn't there. 7,000 missing, and 40-some thousand killed, and that's a big deal, and it just wasn't. It wasn't at home, and of course the armistice was signed soon after I got home, so it was. I said. I didn't get a party or nothing.
Do you remember anybody, parents, girlfriend meeting you when you came back to Montana? Do you remember your arrival back in Montana?
Yeah, you bet, because as sergeants we were afforded quite a little bit more than a private. So they took care of the sergeants and they gave us our money to get out. And there was a fellow from, I can remember, a sergeant from North Dakota, and he says, well, let's split in those days, I don't know what you call it, a club car, but you could sleep.
A sleeping car,
yeah, in the car you could sleep. And it was not that expensive. And I said, okay, I'll split it with you. I'm going to get out at Glendive. My folks came down to get me in Glendive, and that was just wonderful. My sister lived in Glendive, so I took that train, and rather than the High Line, I was up in Wolf Point, so they could come to Glendive and get me. But there was nothing. It was just family, just family. I was glad to have it.
Yeah.
So
Tell me about when you got home and your girlfriend had waited for you.
She was at a job in Billings. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
I couldn't
lucky
believe
for
it.
you, right?
I couldn't believe it. I thought, God, Don, you're the luckiest guy in the world. Somebody, yeah, I still feel that way.
Oh, that's wonderful. Tell me, Don, when you look at what's happening now in Korea, what is that? How do you? Because you were there, you spent months of your life, part of your life in Korea. How do you feel about it when you see the headlines about Korea right now?
You know, at times I was disappointed. You know, I think back in those days, the big menace was communism,
Mm-hmm.
and that's who the communists came into Korea, and I think that's why they told the American public we have to fight the communism and save this country, which they did, and I look back and I see what the South Koreans have done. And as I said, one of those medals was an appreciation from the president of Korea for this, the GIs, so what we did for that country, and I feel pretty good about that. There were times when I came home, I thought, you know, what were we doing over there? You know, to start with, you know, I think a lot of people felt that way. What was it doing? Yeah. It wasn't near like Vietnam. And there was no protests. As I said, people didn't even know you were gone. But the draft was on, and yeah, they killed a lot of American soldiers. And so I feel better now than I did, I think, than about the situation. And I just think it would. It's too bad they couldn't unite the country.
Yeah.
And politics got involved in that, and I won't even go into that. I mean, when I was got there, MacArthur had already been fired, and I see things on TV now about what went on. I can't believe they're trying to lay all the blame on MacArthur, and I just didn't. The news at that time didn't show it that way. I mean, it's reversed. So politics changes, you know. I tell my wife, people forget history, and it's a shame because history teaches you a lot of things, and they keep forgetting it.
Yeah, that's right. So, what do you hope? One of the reasons that we're doing this series is so that people can remember the stories and go back. And so, when people are studying Korea, hopefully they'll listen to your account. What do you hope, if you could tell future generations about your time in Korea or the Korean War, what would you tell them?
No, that's a tough question.
I'm okay with it. I can wait.
I would say what we did was really expensive in the way of lives and everything, but I think worldwide it was worth it, and I hope that they can unite that country some way. And it looks like Trump's had a little more success than past people, and so I'm hopeful. I'd say, and be hopeful. I says, hope for the best.
Yeah. What about when you went over and then you came back and you started a family and all that, and then Vietnam begins. When you saw Vietnam as a soldier who had been over there, been over in the Pacific Asian Rim, did you look at Vietnam differently, or how did you see Vietnam as that started? There were some of the same characteristics. We were worried about communism.
I felt the same way about when I went to Korea. I said, all these protesting, I didn't agree with that. I mean, I could see what the young people, how they felt and everything, but I didn't think that they were doing the right thing. I didn't agree with the protesting. But Vietnam, it said, well, turned out they couldn't win that war, and that they were trying to do the same thing they did in Korea. I mean, politicians screw up all the time, and they did. Evidently, But I went along with that war. I figured, well, they were doing
Hmm.
what they thought was the best, and I wasn't gonna I'm gonna go march any place against them.
Sure, sure.
No.
Did you uh, now looking back on it, were there were happy moments in Korea? Is that fair to say? Was there good memories from Korea? And if so, what's your favorite memory from Korea?
Well, there were happy moments. Yeah, when you got mail every day,
Hmm. Yeah.
and some days you didn't get any for a week, and that was tough. But the happy moments were when you got, I think I would say when you got mail. When you were promoted, you were happy. You got more money.
Yeah.
Combat pay wasn't
Yeah.
much, but it was a happy moment. And
You told me
I have
before we
good.
turn on the camera how much you made as a private. What were you making a week again?
I made $70 a month combat pay,
$70 a month. Wow.
and I think when I came home as a sergeant first class, I was making combat pay. I think I was getting $200 a month, and that was sergeant first class. There was only one higher grade than that. I could only been. So that was pretty good money. Of course, I didn't get that for very long. I wasn't a sergeant first class more than a few months. But
Right. So tell me, what did your time in the Army teach you? What was the best thing that it did for you?
I I tell you what I thought. When I got out of the Army, I thought they should have universal training, that every young person ought to go in the service
Hmm.
for at least 2 years. I felt pretty strongly about that because the young people would know then a lot, and you get your awareness pretty well broadened in the Army, and I thought that was what. Well, my memory's slipping, but
Yep.
anyway, I wouldn't want to go do that again.
I imagine that's true. Did you come from a military family?
My dad was in the National Guard during World War I, and no, I didn't come from a military family. My nephew earned the Bronze Star in Vietnam, and in fact, two of my nephews did. I think were in Vietnam, but my dad didn't fight. I mean, he was in the National Guard and homesteaded and down there by Ekalaka.
Okay, all right.
That's not military.
No.
But I'd taken 2 years of ROTC in college, so I had an advantage.
Oh yeah, that is an advantage.
Yeah. And my wife's brother, he went. They were all Bobcats, and he went ROTC Air Force in Bozeman, and he went in after the Korean War, and he was over in Libya, but. That was about it. I had a nephew's son. He went to military academy. He just retired as a colonel from the Marines, and he was in everything.
Yeah.
He was a tank commander, and he was a helicopter pilot. That's the younger generation.
Mm-hmm.
So more of them than before. So
Right.
So.
Well, that's, hey, Donn, I really want to thank you for sharing your story. I want to thank you for your service, and I want to thank you for coming in and talking with me as part of this series. It has truly been an honor to hear it.
Well, thank you very much, and I think you did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
And as I said, I was glad for the service. I was happy to do it, and I still feel that way. So.
Well,
Very thankful.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right, this has been Daryl Ehrlich and Donn Bruggeman with Stories of Honor.